me losing some of that amniotic fluid that was helping him to stay alive despite all of that cord compression and entanglement. And so as I was losing more and more of it without realizing it. The big one for me with movement is that the night before we lost him, I was actually sitting on the couch with my husband and we were watching TV and we were laughing hysterically at my belly because he was so active and he was just absolutely frantic. It was kind of this complete increase in movement that was so bizarre that it just, really caught our attention. And we were even joking that he thinks that he's going to come out the top because grasping and working so hard to find some way out. And it was just absolutely crazy. And no one had ever mentioned to us anything about movement, and let alone that different movement should be different, or a change in movement should be any kind of a concern. After he started to settle down, we went to bed and I woke up a couple of hours later with this just overwhelming sense of doom. Best way I've been able to even kind of describe it is when the phone rings in the middle of the night and your heart just kind of immediately sinks into your stomach because most of the time if that happens, it's probably not good news. And I just had that feeling in my gut, like something is wrong. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And it just stayed there. And it wasn't until I'd been up for about 20 minutes or so that I realized that the whole time I'd been up and worried about this feeling, I hadn't felt the baby move at all. So that was when I really started to kind of think that maybe that bad feeling was connected to the baby. Because when I first woke up, I really didn't. I thought it was probably one of my grandparents or something unexpected that way. It never occurred to me at the beginning that it might be my baby until I started to realize that he hadn't been moving at all. And then, of course, a few hours later, we were at the doctor's office where they confirmed then that he had no heartbeat. And knowing what I know now, obviously the losing weight, but then particularly that really aggressive, frantic, vigorous movement that was so out of character for him was probably another warning sign that I just didn't even know to watch for, let alone to be concerned about.
And thank you for sharing all of that and being so very open and vulnerable, because I feel like both you and I talking about some of these warning signs might help a future mom that might be listening. They could be pregnant, they could be thinking about getting pregnant, and they might pass this along to a friend who could be thinking about conceiving. And just hearing about our potential warning signs is helpful, because in my mind, as when you're pregnant, I remember my very first phone call that I made to my OB to let them know that I was pregnant. It was almost a year ago. So Lindsey, I don't know how long ago sadly your baby passed away, and you can talk about that if you so choose, but mine, again, very fresh. Almost a year to go to the month is somewhere where I must have conceived, because my husband and I vividly remember Super Bowl Sunday, which we all know Super Bowl Sunday is coming up soon. Super Bowl Sunday of last year, so in 2023, I had my last menstrual cycle. And somewhere between then and me finding out I was pregnant, which was St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, is when I conceived. And I remember calling my OB, letting them know that I was pregnant. And I don't know if this happened to you, Lindsey, but they just said to me, great, like, we're not going to see you until you're 8 or 9 weeks, and just keep growing your baby. Like, literally, that was their advice to me. And I'm like, okay, like, what does that even mean? I've never had a baby before. What do you mean just keep growing my baby? I thought when you find out you're pregnant, you go in, you do like a heartbeat scan and all of these things right off the bat. And that is not the case. So for me, again, my whole pregnancy, it was kind of just me, again, listening to my OB. And it sounds like that's what Lindsey was doing as well, because you think you're hearing what you want to hear. Like, okay, great. Like, you're losing weight, you're gaining weight, you look great, you don't have preeclampsia, you're eating properly, you're not throwing up that much. It's like you hear all these things and you think, okay, I'm in the clear. But no one really talks about movement like Lindsey and I are discussing now, where the only thing that they would ask me when I would go in for my appointments were, what are his kick counts? What are you feeling? Like, after a certain point, I think it was like 26 or 27 weeks, they would ask me, what is his kick count? And every single time I would say to them, okay, you keep asking me this and I keep answering it the same exact way, but you're not really looking into it. So when it came down to, again, sadly, that final visit where he had no heartbeat, I remember saying to myself, it's almost like you want to flip out on the doctor, but you're so in shock, right? At the beginning, you're so in shock that you're even hearing this, that you go numb and you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? But now looking back and thinking about it, I'm like, why the hell wasn't this doctor listening to me from the beginning when I kept saying these things about the movement? And Lindsey, in your case as well, why weren't we taught more about movement? Like, if the baby is moving frantically, maybe that means they're entangled and they're distressed. Your profession, right? Like, obviously, clearly, you kind of went to school for some of these things, which is fantastic. So I'm glad I'm able to ask you personally, do you think that our OBs should be teaching us more about kick counts and movement and not just saying, hey, what is the kick count?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I will give them a little bit of, I don't want to say a pass, but I will give them a little bit of grace, because for the most part, they are operating under the system that they were trained into. And the current system does not give them a whole lot of background about what advice or what suggestions to provide through this. And then certainly not a real consistent or compassionate way to respond if any of these concerns are raised, and how to best investigate and evaluate what that might be. I will say, I think we've been making some progress, even though it's painfully slow. My loss was many years ago. And so when I was pregnant, the only movement question I got was, is your baby moving? And they would actually just make a check mark. It wasn't anything about, how often, or what is it like, or when is he the busiest, or when is he more lazy? Like all of those things that might help kind of characterize some of that movement wasn't anywhere. And so, the fact that some of these health professionals are at least asking more about the frequency piece of it, even if not the rest of it, that is a small step in the right direction. But there's so much more that can and should be done.
I 100% agree with that. And I know that, God willing, the next time I do get pregnant, I know I personally will be more of an advocate for myself, having gone through that loss. Lindsey, I'm not sure if you ever tried to conceive again, or if you do have any living children. That's something you can choose to disclose if you want to, up to you. But I know that whenever I do get pregnant in the future, I will be more of an advocate and I will ask more questions. And I feel like I'm going to be on more of a high alert because of what happened to me, because I thought that I had such a quote unquote perfect pregnancy until it wasn't. I just think I'm going to be having nerves through the roof, which is obviously bad for myself and my baby to begin with, but how do you combat those things? And I know you and I will talk about more of that, and we get into discussing more of your foundation and how you are helping be a positive resource for others. Your loss journey, I know you already discussed how you lost your son. I'm very sorry to hear that. Again, similar to me, although my son was not wrapped up in his cord, we actually don't have a reason for why he passed away. They told me that it was quote unquote potentially a freak accident, which for me, I don't know how that sits well with me. I don't know what happened, and nothing was detected after he was born. They said he looked fine. We had the placenta looked at. We did not do an autopsy on him. We chose not to, but they told us that even if we did something like an autopsy, that a lot of the times things cannot be found. I don't know if that, for those that are tuning in that have gone through a loss, I don't know if it makes it quote unquote easier, because obviously it's not easy. So I use that lightly. Is it easier knowing the cause, in the sense that like it was a heart defect or a cord, or is it harder not knowing why? Like in my case, they literally told me it could have been a freak accident. Obviously, in both cases, it is detrimental and sad, because either way, you probably couldn't have prevented it. Lindsey, how are you currently coping with your loss and grief in a healthy manner? And at the beginning of your loss, I'm interested in hearing, how did you personally deal with triggers such as seeing other pregnant women and babies and going through the motions of holidays and not having your baby? Because I know that's something I struggled with a lot this past holiday season. I would bawl my eyes out, and it makes me sad just thinking about it, because I envisioned, right, like experiencing my first Christmas holding my son and getting to do the Super Bowl with him and having him get to know his cousins up north, and not being able to do any of those things still is a trigger, because again, this is very fresh. How did you deal with triggers at the beginning, and you might still be dealing with it now? And how are you currently handling your loss and grief in a healthy manner?
It probably may not be the healthiest, but I will say that certainly the first several months, maybe even that first year more, my coping mechanism was to basically hunker down and avoid as many of those scenarios and people as I could. It would absolutely just tear me apart to walk into Target and see the baby section, or to pass a mom with a very pregnant belly or with a newborn. Just those simple things like going to the grocery store that nobody thinks of as being a part of the grief journey become some of the most significant pieces. And the ones that I could plan for and prepare for, I felt like they were still horrible, don't get me wrong. But the ones that really left more of a traumatic imprint, I think, were those triggers that you couldn't prepare for and that just came out of nowhere. So for a while there, the only way that I could manage those types of unexpected triggers was to try to minimize how many of them I encountered. And I know that's not for everybody. There's probably a lot of people that would say that isn't the healthiest way to approach it. That was kind of my survival mode at that moment in time. I did go on to have 3 more pregnancies and 3 more living babies. And I will say that actually is part of what took my grief on a completely different path, because as soon as I got into that next pregnancy, the level of care that I had and the responsiveness and I did change OBs, but the responsiveness because of my history was so stark that it really grabbed my attention. And while I was unbelievably grateful for it and not sure that I could have gotten through those pregnancies with that additional testing and monitoring and all of the things that we did, I was at the same time really bitter that I couldn't have this without losing a child first. And so why did my first pregnancy have to be a test run? Or why did my first baby have to die in order to be granted this level of care? When for the most part, we weren't doing anything that was super high tech or expensive or Star Wars level invasiveness. We were just doing more frequent and more interactive and more communicative engagements with the healthcare team. And so that really kind of made me realize this didn't have to be this way. I'm not saying that, what I know now would have completely prevented his loss or not. I can't go back, so it doesn't matter. But I think what it has done is it kind of gave me a purpose of saying that the system is broken if a family has to lose a child in order to receive the best care that we have available. And so that's really where I've put a lot of my grief energy since then. And that's really how Star Legacy came to be, is just because we wanted to do something to honor him and to make a legacy for him or have his life have some impact on this world in a positive way. And the thing that really stood out to us the most in those early, kind of months and years was the fact that we shouldn't have had to lose him in order to get the care that I believe allowed his younger siblings to be here safe and healthy.
And once again, thank you for sharing all that, because that is a headspace that I am currently in. And a lot of the women that I have been speaking to that either A, have lost a baby, or B, have had a scare with almost losing a child while the baby was in the womb, have said the same type of thing where it's like, why do I have to lose a baby in order for me to get more care? Like, why isn't this just the standard of care to begin with? For example, if I said multiple times, yeah, I understand he has a good heartbeat, you keep telling me this, but if I'm not feeling him and I should be seeing him kick and punch my stomach and I'm not, why aren't you doing a stress test on me? Why aren't you giving me an extra ultrasound? Like, I don't understand why now all of a sudden I have to go through a birth and a loss for you to now do that potentially the next time I get pregnant. And I say this with a little bit of anger and bitterness, just like it sounds like, Lindsey, you have had gone through that and you still might have those thoughts. For me, again, I'm sorry guys if I'm coming off as very rash, but for me, again, this is very fresh, and it is refreshing to hear from somebody like Lindsey, who, congratulations for having 3 living children. I, God willing, hope that happens to my husband and I as well. So that does give me hope that we can conceive and have living children in the future, but it doesn't negate the fact, like Lindsey is saying, that we still had to go through the loss of our firstborn. Again, that's why I'm enjoying having Lindsey on here. And I hope that you are all sitting here taking notes and learning from this episode. And maybe Lindsey will open up a little bit more about what it was like thinking about trying to conceive post her loss. Any advice, Lindsey, to those that are currently going through this and that are fresh in this, like myself? And how important is it having a healthy tribe, like a husband or a partner, your friends, having resources? What is the importance of having somebody there or some tools to get you through this as best as possible, especially when you're in the thick of it, a couple months, even the first year of going through a loss?
I think my best advice is to be kind to yourself. It's really easy to beat yourself up, not only over the loss, but then over how you're grieving or how, other people are responding to your grief, and so many elements that we kind of internalize. And it's really easy to take that all on and worry more about those elements than just taking care of yourself. So give yourself a little bit of grace, and it's okay to do some of those guilty pleasures that help you heal and that help you kind of restore your soul and your spirit a little bit more. You're absolutely right that having that supportive group of people around you give you that space to feel all the feels. The emotional roller coaster of grief is so intense, and so unpredictable that if you don't have that safe space to do all of it, it just adds another layer of pressure to have to try to manage it in a more socially acceptable way. But if you have that strong support system where you all can just be in the moment and feel those emotions as they come. And I've had so many parents pass along just amazing tidbits. One dad in particular said, I spent all my energy trying to find a route around this intense grief and the pain, but I finally accepted that the only way to the other side is to go straight through it. And I think that's really profound, and it kind of gives us all some idea of it's okay to lean into the hard work of grief, because it really is the only thing that's going to get us to a different place. And I think there are so many ways to do that, and it's going to be different for every person and every family, but just finding ways to be good to yourself, to recognize that this baby or any of the babies that you're missing will always have a very special place in your family story and in your family and in your heart. I know we have really appreciated kind of finding tangible ways to represent that, or to kind of make that a little bit more visible to us when we want it to be. It doesn't have to be that for anybody either, but there's just so many ways that you can try to make this baby have a place in your family that is obviously so different than what you had hoped and dreamt for, but it doesn't mean that it's any less loving and meaningful to have them in a different way.
Lindsey, that was very beautifully said.